back to PA Chalk Cup. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Lachlan. How we doing?
Good, mate. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Obviously, we had some technical difficulties just now, but we're back. So, if you just let us know who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are.
On the 6th of December, I'll be hosting a webinar on the practical application of sports science data. There's a lot of talk right now about what to track and how to track it, but in this session, we'll dive into why it matters and how we can make it actionable. It's all about how we can apply it to our athletes, how they can apply it to their sport. At the end of the day, that is what matters. Joining us are Thomas Newman, Teofi Ziemnicki, and Missy Mitchell Macbeth. More about our speakers in the description. This is an incredible lineup which will help guide you through the practical sides of sports science and how we can apply it throughout our athlete's career. To grab your ticket and learn more about the webinar, follow the link in the description, and I'll see you there.
Yeah, easy. So my name's Lachlan Wilmot. For those that are not based in Australia, it's probably a bit more of a unique name, but also known as Lachlan. I'm a strength conditioning coach. I run a private facility here called Athletes Authority, which is a fully fledged performance facility just for athletes. We've got both in Sydney and in Melbourne, two cities here in Australia. But my history or background is team sport in the professional ranks with Australian football or AFL. Again, it's an Australian-based sport if you know much about it. But I was with the GWS Giants for approximately 10 years and then transitioned across to rugby league in the NRL with the Parramatta Eels for a few years there before fully transitioning into the private sector. My business partner at the time was running the company almost by himself, so he probably would have killed me if I spent any more time in professional sport. And so I did a few more years in the private sector, and then got the sort of team sport itch again, and jumped back into professional sport in netball. Again, if you're not in the Commonwealth, you probably have no idea what netball is, but it's a female game, very similar to basketball, if I had to describe it to anything. But court-based sport, very high-end athletes. They're phenomenal athletes to work with. But shifted now. I've got a fourth kid due in Jan, which again I like to tell everyone because I like to get the sympathy. But I'll have 4 under 4 in Jan, so it'll be a full-on 18 months for me. So trying to keep my commitments to a minimum over the next sort of year or so. But mate, great to jump on and looking forward to a chat.
As a strength coach and a business owner, my time is quite limited. My favorite part about being a coach is the fact that I get to interact with athletes and be with athletes and really coach them. That's why I use TeamBuildr. I remember the days of searching for exercises, manually typing them in, and spending hours on spreadsheets and organizing my programs. This tends to be quite tedious and a lot of time consuming, which meant that I wasn't able to coach as much. So now for my business, TeamBuildr is a non-negotiable. It's an all-in-one programming platform that lets you create and deliver workouts to your athletes just in a few clicks. With TeamBuildr, I can customize programs, track athletes' progress in real time, and generate performance reports. My athletes get full ownership of their progress and can even share feedback on how they felt the session's going. Having this in place actually gives me more time to coach and be with my athletes. If you're ready to take your next step in your programming, give more time to your athletes, head over to teambuildr.com and use promo code PAChalkup, that's PACHALQUP, and start your 30-day free trial.
No, perfect. We should also take a second to pray for your sleep schedule. I
Yeah,
think that
like
one.
we're saying, yeah, schedule implies there's some sort of plan there. There is certainly no schedule whatsoever at the moment.
That's something that, again, I've not had kids personally, but my sister, I know her, and she and her husband struggled a lot with it. So I can
Mm.
always sympathize with new parents and parents who've got more than one kid.
Yeah, you just got to swallow it and move on. There's no point dwelling on it because you can't fix it.
um, you also mentioned netball. We are obviously a Commonwealth, so I've had some coaching experience with netball athletes.
Mm.
One, they're very hardworking. Two, if you actually watch, like sit down and properly watch a game, the amount of feistiness and just like brute strength that is in it is
Mm.
mental.
Yeah, they're phenomenal athletes. From For those that don't know netball, you can't actually move with the ball, so they'll be
Mhm.
running at full pace. When they take possession, it's effectively you've got to have a dead stop. So as you can appreciate, the absolute eccentric and decel type loading that they go through is phenomenal. There is no way around it. But by the end of their careers, they have absolutely destroyed knees. It is what it is. They kind of sign up for it. But when working with them, yeah, their concentric acceleration, their eccentric stopping power on a dime is just unbelievable. And they're aggressive. Lots of change of
Mhm.
direction, lots of high accelerations in very short and small spaces, which leads to a very taxing game. There's kind of no off switch. I learned very quickly that there's no medium or low level drills. It's just you kind of
Mhm.
on or you're off. Everything's either full pace or they're not moving. So no, it was exciting to work with. That's for sure.
How do you sort of prepare them for those loads, like the stop and loads, and
Yeah.
then the decel, XL, and then COD that does go on?
It's um, it's probably an interesting one. I think netball, even something like volleyball and things like that, really the epitome of what I term like your sport specificity paradox, where there's this unique challenge of saying, well, let's take volleyball for an example. They jump all the time. They jump in training. So as an S&C coach, you're like, well, I need to get them to jump. I need to make them better jumpers. So what a lot of strength and conditioning coaches will do is they then jump them. But the problem you see with this is there's so much jumping in games, there's so much jumping in training that sometimes the last thing they need is to have more jump
Mhm.
load in the gym or however you're eliciting your jump exposure. And netball is a bit the same. You know, they spend all training and all game doing all of this sort of low to medium amplitude jumping. There's so much change of direction. There's so much of this continuous low amp jumping. And to give you an example, it's probably hard if you haven't seen the sport, but if you're a defender, if you're defending someone, because they move so quick, often the defenders, or if you're defending someone, you will kind of do this almost like weird pogo, just
Mhm.
bouncing, kind of just waiting for them to change direction, and you're keeping reactive with it. And they kind of do that the whole game. So you've got the games, you've got them in training, 4 court sessions a week in pre-season, sometimes a fifth when they roll in season. You've got 2 to 3 in a week plus the game. So you've got hours and hours of this court exposure. So realistically, I kind of bookend it, and the way I don't work with volleyballers. We've got a few volleyballers here that we've had come through, but the way I would work with volleyball and the way I work with netball, as the two examples I just gave, is you kind of bookend it. So with my girls, that I would certainly look for opportunities where maybe I get some low amplitude work in, but a lot of the exposure I did with them was maximum force output, high intensity. So heavy squatting, heavy deadlifting, or heavy split squat work. But then I would also shift in to small volume exposures of high intensity plyos or jumps, which yes, they get a bit on court, but I would really dip into it, small volumes, high intensity, and then come out of it. I didn't do a lot of high volume, low amplitude or medium amplitude work because they just do so much of it on the court. So, like I said, I kind of view it as this bookend where I try and hit either sides and then hopefully it bleeds in. And
Mhm.
realistically, it was a bit similar with the change of direction work, where all of their drills, the drills that they do with their coaches, there is so much high repetition of change of direction. And you'd argue because there's so much volume, the intensity is probably a bit less. You can't sustain that type of intensity over and over. So in the same fashion that in a field sport you'd approach high velocity, high speed running and try and dip them into it and expose them to it. I kind of did that with the change of direction side. So my drills would never expose them to the same volume as their skill-based drills do because they just do so much of it. So what I did is said, okay, well, how do we elicit change of direction drills at maximum intensity so I can really improve their 1 RM of change of direction? And that's what we did. We focused on lower volume, but things like 505s and stuff like that, very simple changes of direction, but made it very, very intense in that single or double type movement. Give them a lot of rest, go again. Again, working across that curve. So I'm focusing on the higher intensity, lower volume because I know how much volume they get in training. And looked, it seemed to work quite well, and they pulled up well, and we had some really good results. So again, that's the approach that I took, and seemed to work quite well.
Yeah. How did that then transfer on to AFL, which is sort of a different beast in itself?
Yeah, look back in the AFL days, it's like probably the best way to look at it is contrasting the AFL to rugby league or NRL when I went to, where a lot of people look at AFL and it is a larger running game, no doubt. There's a lot more volume, and athletes are typically far more aerobically. So people look at it and think, oh, you must be very good at conditioning, or aerobically they must do a lot of conditioning. Versus rugby league, which is a lot more anaerobic, it's a lot more stop-start, physical tackling, back pedal, hit the line, back pedal, hit the line. But what we find is in the AFL, because it's so open and everyone's kind of working, they achieve so much of their target high velocity or volume within drills that when we look at the specific conditioning we did with AFL players, it was very much as an ad hoc addition. So where do we need to find the extra part? Is it some more high velocity work? Is it some more aerobic power work? We used to do a lot of aerobic power,
Mhm.
repeat 400s, repeat 800s, even repeat 1Ks. These type of things where it's really pushing the envelope of that aerobic power area. But then going across into the NRL, a lot of people in the NRL would say, well, you came from AFL, so you must have so much conditioning knowledge and stuff like that. And I actually found that I did far less conditioning in AFL. And obviously, when I was in the AFL, we had a conditioning coach. That was the specialty with GPS and everything like that. But a lot of the role in that was actually manipulating training with the coach to make sure a lot of the drills elicited what we needed. And then we would only top up and layer in things that we felt were slightly being missed in training. But in the NRL, because if you've ever worked in NRL, I kind of know it, because of the way the line's set up, you can be on the edge, which is the outside, whether it be a wing or a centre, and you can hide very easily in a lot of the drills and do very little volume of running, and even do very little contact if you want to, depending on how they're set up. So in NRL, the amount of conditioning and specific conditioning is far greater than in the AFL, in spite of the AFL probably being seen as a more conditioning based sport. But in rugby league, I found that the specificity of conditioning was far higher than what it was in AFL, simply because it needed to be, because the NRL boys can hide so much easier in some of their line work. And yeah, the intent that we had, that the number of minutes, hours a week that we had dedicated to pure conditioning drills were far higher in the NRL. And I really enjoyed being able to have that opportunity to attack some specific conditioning. But in the AFL, there's a lot of specific conditioning, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the drills are set up and designed to make sure that they're eliciting enough of the response that you kind of need.
Yeah. I mean, with the conditioning piece, I like that you said aerobic power, which not only is the ability to last, but still be able to maintain that quick sharpness throughout the whole duration of the game.
Mm.
How does that then transfer into developing it into more of a making sure that they've got all the key set skills, so like strength to be able to hit a tackle every time or hit whatever's needed throughout the whole game too. So like specific powers, strength, and then making sure that they've got endurance to keep up with it the whole time.
Yeah, well, look, when we use the terms, and I try and keep it quite simple. To be honest, I think when it comes to any type of energy system development discussion, there's probably two groups. There's the overcomplicated and the oversimplified. I will always go to the oversimplified. Some people call it reductionistic. That's fine, but my brain works far better when I break things down like that and keep it simple. But I'll always look at a conditioning continuum, so to speak, of capacity versus power. And I look at all the three key energy systems you tend to term, as simplistic as it is. But if we look at our aerobic, our anaerobic, and then that sort of more ATP PC, each of those for me has a component of capacity and power. capacity being the maximum type of volume that you can do in that energy system, and then power, the highest amount of work rate that you can do while staying in that energy system. And I think that I've spoke about bookends a little bit today, but the two bookends are the things that probably get missed the most. I think aerobic capacity is very easy to do. You just keep going. But aerobic power, where to pull the pin on that, where to push someone really hard, where they're really fighting in that aerobic system and they're maximizing it without drifting into this just aerobic capacity, is a bit of an art form. The same as when we start to go into the anaerobic zones, these disgusting lactate-based threshold pieces. To be able to keep someone just edging into that lactate threshold without blowing up too much is really an art form. And it's really hard to give specific prescriptions because everyone's a little bit different. And we can see the tables that give us X amount of minutes per system before you blow out into something else. But it's always just a general overview. So it does take time and the ability to read a group. And I often talk about, the rest is king. The less rest you have, the more you'll start to fall closer to that aerobic response where people are just holding on, they're gassed out, they're just trying to make sure that they keep going. They're not having any quality within their work. The more rest you give, the more quality you can bring. And obviously, if we give a lot of rest, we shift into that real high speed exposure, which everyone probably starts to get a bit more of an understanding now where, when you're treating sprint work and you're doing high speed work, especially team sport athletes, I always say it to them, I say, guys, we're going to get really awkward here because you're going to run out of things to talk about in this rest period. That's how long it is. If we're not getting awkward, we're not resting long enough. And realistically, team sport athletes, people often give them this opinion of being a bit lazy sometimes or hiding and resting on their skill, but they just want to work. So pure speed stuff for them feels a bit odd because they're so used to just being grinded into the ground all the time that you've really got to set the tone. And sometimes you need to mix in some skill development. In AFL, we do some hand pass work. In NRL, you do some basic touch work to take their mind off the fact that they're resting. Because after about a minute and a half, they're ready to go. Not because they've recovered, but because they're so used to working while being under recovered. So setting the tone for that's really important. So understanding rest periods, but understanding your team is really important as well. So I would often expose them to high speeds. I would then mold that into some real lactate threshold work by decreasing that rest period. Boys would be really starting to yell, getting angry, getting sore. And then you could do one or two things, either pull the pin and really finish on that, or you can keep grinding and you finish the session in a far more aerobic style where they're just holding on. Their lactate's blown, they're kind of just trying to get through it, which has its place. But you need to decide when you're actually going to elicit that and when you're going to actually expose them to it. So I think the understanding of capacity and power is a really powerful thing when we're designing these programs. And then you spoke about how does that convert then into the strength and power side of things. I think I've certainly seen programs where they will periodize in an opposite fashion, i.e. if we're going really hard on field, then we'll decrease in the gym to allow a little bit better exposure on field. When we're unloading a bit on field, we're then going to start to dial it up in the gym and get really good 1RMs, good responses, get some good indicators on where they're at. I tend to find that quite hard to deal with because from a systematic approach, you're never getting a true deload week. So you're kind of always pushing them. I certainly am, as much as my background is strength and power, that's what I did, that's what I love. A deconditioned team will always be the one that gets beaten. Like if I had to give up strength and power or conditioning, as much as I love strength and power, a conditioned team is always going to beat any other team, no matter how good they are at strength, power, power, whatever it is. Conditioning is king when it comes to team sport environments. Obviously, skill, but conditioning's queen. We call it skills king, but ultimately what we can control, conditioning's a thing. So that's not to say that strength and power is not important, but we've got to have priorities. And in team sport, you can't have everything. And the people that fight for everything are the ones that get nothing in the end. And, whenever working with a team sport athlete or a team and coaches, skills coaches, everyone in between, the priority's got to be skill. Get them good at their game. The next has got to be, they've got to be conditioned to do the skill. Everything else comes after that. So what I'll always do is say, right, if we're going hard on field, I'm going hard in the gym as well. Because when I'm softer on field or I'm deloading, I can deload in the gym and the team actually get a true recovery week. They can reset and go again. 100% is the gym going to be affected by the fact that they're getting absolutely hammered on the field? Of course it is. But sometimes a bit of dirty science, and in spite of what the science tells us, in person, you see it. Sometimes the whole adage of just having a big week, they bring it. Doesn't matter if they're tired. They go hard on field. They come into the gym. They set PBs against all odds, and then you give them a good deload week. So, in spite of probably what some science says, I will always go everything up, everything down, and try and replicate that as much as possible. And I find that I get the best responses from that. And in a team sport environment, you're never going to be the best of everything. You've just got to define each athlete's strength, make sure you keep that bloody strong, and then do your best to lift everyone else's weaknesses. But that's the fine
100%.
balance of a team sport.
There's a couple points that I want to go back to. One of them is the you sometimes have to get dirty with your athletes. And I love that because sometimes, and you've kind of touched on it, sometimes when they're tired is when they're able to actually lift the most and they're
Mm,
ready to PB. They're ready to absolutely fucking beast it. And
yep.
it's I still don't know why that happens. Like you mentioned, science would say that that's probably the worst time for them to PR and PB, but it happens. And like
Yep.
this is the second point that I kind of wanted to touch on that you've just mentioned is science is great in theory, but in practical doesn't always work. And I had Adam fight on a couple weeks ago, and we talked about the same thing. Like he runs the program at Springfield College,
Mm,
who's the mecca for strength and conditioning, and he far more values the practical side of S&C than the theory. And he's a lecturer, and
mm,
he's like, I want my kids to come through my program and get as much experience as possible because
yeah,
experience is key. So
100%.
it's kind of one of those that like to really be in it and really become the best coach you can be, you have to experiment with your athletes and yourself and then sort of take it from there.
Well, to give you a great example, I think you look at all the discussion and research that looks around finishing a field session and then the amount of time typically people would recommend for recovery before getting into the gym and lifting. It's a fair amount of time.
Hmm.
In practice, you cannot do that, A, in a normal work day for an athlete, but two, there's this fine line between recovery and just flattening out. And I'm not saying you can do this all the time, and we didn't do this all the time, but some of the best sessions I've ever seen in the gym and some of the biggest PBs and PRs that I've seen in the gym has been when we've been in a rush and we, for whatever reason, maybe in the AFL, they may have had a players association meeting they needed to get to. In the NRL, we had a few, like, I'll never forget the NRL, we had a day, it would have been 40-degree heat. It was
Wow.
absolutely heat as ever. So we were on field by 7:30, so early. Got our field session done. We knew it was going to be hot. Coaches said, you know what, we just want to get the boys in and out. We want to give them the day. It's been a big training week. So we finished the field session. And in NRL, if you've ever been, the boys, they don't tend to wear underwear. They wear what we call Speedos, but budgie smugglers, swim-like trunks because they're a little bit tighter. And if the pants get pulled, pants slide off, but the undies don't come down. So often they'll be in their Speedos. So it was so bloody hot by the end that half of them had stripped their tops off. They were running around, they were doing their recovery. They're in their Speedos, and these boys were just absolutely jacked, ready to go. Like, let's get in, get out. And they went into the gym, literally walked off the field into the gym. It would have been about 37 by then, 37-degree heat. They're all just in their Speedos, and it was just an hour of absolutely non-stop energy. I've never seen anything like it. PR after PR, energy through the roof, sweat everywhere. It was bloody disgusting. We had to get the place completely steam
Deep
clean.
clean.
But they left, and you've condensed what would have been, probably would have been about 11 Ks, 10 Ks. So it was a big session on field. They've then got in for a big lift, predominantly lower body. They've got it all done by about midday, and they're out. You've had PRs everywhere. Now, that is the complete opposite of what any periodization or scientific literature would probably suggest. Again, I'm not saying you can repeat that day in, day out, because eventually you're going to cook them.
Or no.
But these type of things can be done, and players love it. They get in, they get excited. And in the netball, we had far less time to play with, and we kind of had to go straight into the gym after court. So we kind of picked this magic around that 25-minute mark was kind of ideal, because if we crept to say 45 minutes, the girls had started to cool down hormonally. They'd started to flatten, and they were a bit down, and it was very hard to get them back up unless you've say got 2 hours where they can go and properly come down, recover, eat, and then come back up again. This weird 45-minute time's terrible, because it's enough time for them to kind of flatten out. Whereas we found the 25 minutes was actually really nice. They would do their court session, they would go, they would have a little bit of a nutritional break in the middle, they'll take their supplements, it'll be light food, they'll keep kind of moving, they'll still be banterish, they go into the gym, we'd do a small prep, don't need much prep, they've been on court for the past hour and a half to 2 hours, and then we'd roll into the lift. And realistically, that was the best result we had for them. If we had a bigger day, because if their Players Association allowed them, they had to be out of the facility by 1 p.m. So if we could go to, say, 5 p.m., then we may split the sessions and stuff like that and be a bit longer. But you got to play the cards you're dealt. And a lot of people think professional sport, you have all of these easy options and everything's handed to you. But you've probably got the most constraints in any environment. Pro sport's the most constraining, because everything's got to be fitted into it. Everything's got to have an agenda. Everything is controlled by the Players Association, what you can and can't do, when you can do it, and stuff like that. And everyone wants a piece of the pie. You got to fit Pilates. You got to fit recovery. You got to fit skill work, video work. They've got to go to appearances. They've got to go to school visits. They've got to give presentation. Like, there's so much stuff you got to put in, and they've also got to play the game. And so you're a puppet master, just trying to balance everything and make sure you get things fitted in. And it's certainly far from ideal, but you do what you can. You do what you can.
100%. It was the exact same at Washington University when I was there.
Mm.
Out fair, it was preseason. You could. It's probably not advisable to do this on season, but what would happen is the athletes would get in at 7 a.m. We'd have an hour's lifting session, field session, and then so that's two sessions, and then the session after would be so it'd rotate defense and offense in
Yeah.
between the field session, but you'd still have that field session, and you're
Mm.
going in from one to the other. And in between each session, you'd have a big ass shake. You'd have some
Yeah.
snacks, some gummies, and straight into a workout. And it also builds that camaraderie within the team. I bet the team after that session was hyped to be with each other, hyped
Yeah.
that they made it through.
100%, mate. That's like I said. You can't be delivering that intensity every day. Like,
Mm,
it's exhausting. It's this accumulated fatigue that just builds, and kind of people just hold on. And so yeah, you've still got to have a good long term plan. But 100%, mate, when teams get put under those type of challenges, like at the end of the day, that's what all realistically, what's most team building based drills are. Putting people in hard places and they get through it together. Sometimes it's physically hard, sometimes mentally hard. That's the whole intent of some of the military type camps. Whether you love them or hate them, there's some pretty bad experiences. There's also some good experiences that all different teams have. But that's the premise. Yeah, going through it together, getting through it together. Add a shared experience, and you bond a little bit closer. And you put enough of them over a certain period of time, and you create a team. That's why you look at any successful like junior or youth team. Typically, they're a team that they all came together at under nines, and by
mm,
chance they've gone through together, and they're saying under 15s or an under 17s team, and they just dominate. And you just like we've got a great example here in Australia, the Penrith Panthers, who have just done a four-peat, 4 grand finals in a row, past 4 years, which is for any sport in the world unbelievable. 4 times back to back, and they are synonymous for a majority of their team having come through from, I think it was like an under 11s level in their academy. And they were all together all the way through and now in the NRL. And they've just been together for so long. They just understand every player's movement. They're so close. They're such a tight-knit team that you don't even need to have the best players per se. You genuinely have, as corny as it sounds, the best team. They just understand each other and their system and what they need to do. And often, the coach kind of just says, "Go and do you. Like, go out and play. Like, I don't want to give you too many directions." Now, obviously, as the team evolves and we start to see it now that some of those team members get offered bigger contracts at different teams, and then eventually they all disperse. But you build common threads, common experiences over time. It's not hard, but it also is a tough thing to do with a team environment and the dynamics of humans and individuals.
100%. This is sort of all accumulating into a big question now, is how have these experiences shaped the way that you lead your programs now and sort of have that relationship with your athletes and what you look forward for when you're developing that athlete?
Funny, so we've got the ASCA conference this weekend, and I'm actually presenting on this exact topic. So
Nice.
I am.
Sneak peek.
Yes, yeah, you got to push it. It's obviously there's a lot of avenues, a lot of areas, a lot of different aspects that you can approach. The best way I tend to summarize it, and I think I've learned this over the years, and me personally, I always like to think that I'm a very professional individual. I like being professional, but when I was younger, I was so professional. I think I hampered my connection with athletes quite a lot. And the older I've got, the more confident I've got, the more unprofessional I've got, the better I've gotten as a coach. And what I mean by that is, when I was, 20, 21, I was in the AFL, we were talking, athletes would come up to me and go, "What'd you do on the weekend?" And for me, standing there going, "Fuck, it's his first year, second year in pro sport. Got to be professional." It's like, "Oh, what did I do on the weekend? I programmed. Program." And the athlete looks at you and goes, "Oh, yeah, like, great. Well, clearly that's good for you. But deep down, I know what I did. I went and got on the piss with my mates. I was still a 20, 21-year-old. I still enjoyed my time. Yes, I did some programming, but I still had a fun weekend. But ultimately, I'm not going to say that because in my head, I'm like, nah, it's unprofessional to say. So I'll tell the athlete, nah, I program. Meanwhile, I often talk about conversational threads. I kind of mentioned it before, but when you're talking to someone, they're looking for threads to grab onto to continue a conversation. Those threads often need to be relatable. So if I'm talking to an athlete and I say I've programmed all weekend, and the athlete then looks at me and goes, "Well, fuck, I don't program," there is not a single thread that I can grab onto there. So the conversation dies pretty quickly, and you often don't have any sharper interaction. As a complete opposite and the extreme, if I had have actually said I went and got pissed with my mates, then there's actually way more threads there for the athlete, because that athlete, I guarantee you, has gone out with friends drinking. So that athlete can actually grab onto it. And I'm not saying you need to go out and get pissed to be able to have these relationships. But if you had just been honest and gone, "Yeah, look, during the Saturday, it was a beautiful day, did a bit of programming, but then, went to the beach with a few mates and had a few drinks, and geez, ended up actually being a far bigger night than I planned. So Sunday was a little bit of a slow start." Straight away, something simple like that, an athlete will come back and say, "Oh, fuck, we've all been there." Like, suddenly you've just got this little hint of a thread, and this conversation can build. And so now I think I've gotten to the stage where I'm very open with my athletes. Like, there is absolutely no secrets. I'm very, whether you want to call it unprofessional or not, but every team and every athlete I've worked with since, I've gotten far closer and closer to the Swift girls that I've just worked with. Like, I'm very open with them. I would tell them everything. I'd be very much myself, and the connections you build with them are far greater because you create far more conversational threads that turn into far better connections, far better understanding, and you're just being vulnerable, as a lot of people call it. That's not to say that you need to just tell them everything. I'm also a big believer in the fact that if I got divorced tomorrow, that's not something I want to bring to work. I've still got to bring energy. I've got to bring enthusiasm for my athletes. That's what I'm there for. But that doesn't mean you have to hide everything to be like that. You can be very open and energetic. And I think that's, the feedback that I often get is I'm consistent in my energy, but I'm also quite open. And that's, I couldn't have a greater feedback from athletes, because that's exactly what I want to do. I don't want to be a stiff that stands there that no one can relate to because all I talk about is strength conditioning. Because I can tell you right now, the people that don't care about strength and conditioning are the people that you're coaching. Very few athletes genuinely love the intricacies of strength and conditioning. Yes, you're going to find the odd athlete that really enjoys concepts and methods and wants to talk a bit about it. But trust me, they will come to you. You're going to know them. But most of them don't want to talk about that. Most of the athletes that, again, I'm assuming it's fairly most people, so like Married at First Sight, the Bachelorette, all this type of crap TV that I don't really want to watch. But that's all they talk about. So when I was young, that's what I did. I went home and watched that, so I had something to talk to them about. Because all I traditionally did was, strength conditioning, head in the hole. And I think I see myself in a lot of young coaches when they come through that all they do is strength and conditioning. And you need lots of X's and O's, lots of education, but no one cares. Like nobody cares when you're talking to them. And you can have a far simpler program that an athlete will actually adhere to than a complex one that they're just really not going to adhere to because they don't have much buy-in with you. So it's probably a very long-winded way of just saying, be yourself and
Yeah.
trust me when I say athletes aren't going to look at you and go, you're unprofessional. They're not expecting you to be programming and learning 24/7. Be yourself and trust me, they'll connect far better with you and you get a lot more out of them.
See, I believe this to my core. And you kind of mentioned the oversimplified brain that you have compared to like oversimple like over the top with everything. So a lot of the discussion in our field is should you do Olympic weightlifting or derivatives compared to say like
Yeah.
uh a trap bar jump or whatever. I am a big Olympic derivatives guy. I love them. I find a lot of benefits in them. A lot of the questions I get is like, how do you have time to program them? How do you have time to teach them? It's like they're not hard to teach. My question is, does your athletes do deadlifts? Yes. They do shrugs? Yes. They do upright rows? Yes. Front squat? Yes.
Mm,
They know how to clean.
mm,
Now the next thing is pressing. Can they press? Yes. Can they press wider? Yes. They can clean and snatch. They can clean and jerk. They can snatch. It's just putting them together in a simplified form
mm,
to get them to lift it. Now, when it comes to oversimplifying things, that's one of the ways I do it. For that reason, the athletes don't care what the calcium pump does.
mm,
I know what it does because I went through education. That's because I need it. They are in there to create a future longevity within their sport. That's what I'm there for. I'm not there to teach them my whole degree. So I'm not going to, unless they ask, like you said, yes, I'll explain. I had one guy ask me why he bench presses. He was a D line. Yeah, you push people for a living. You
mm.
kind of need
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So I explained it, but like,
And I think that's where you probably you need to decide what nuance you're going to go down. I think the old adage of what hill are you going to die on. I think way too many coaches choose to plant their flag on the fucking smallest hills that
mhm,
I've ever seen. I I think social media probably promotes it, but some of the arguments you see, you're just like, who
who
cares?
gives a
It's
fuck?
just
Yeah.
like it's just so when you're actually in the thick of it, it does not matter. And it's like it would be like someone asking me, are your athletes vegetarian? Some have been, yeah, but not all. Like,
Hmm.
or the vegetarian ones, are they better? No, I couldn't tell you. There's no difference. Like, there is no difference. I can't tell you if the vegetarian ones were better or not. Like, it's the same as with your Olympic lifting. Like, do your athletes Olympic lift? Well, some do. Like,
Hmm.
sometimes it's an easy environment to coach. Sometimes it's not. I've been in the gym with 40 athletes. It's just been me. Am I going to prescribe hang snatches to every athlete? Probably not.
Yep,
But
I agree.
if I'm working one on one, can I get dirtier? 100% I can. Have I had athletes that Olympic lift that have been terrible players? Yes, I have. Have I had athletes at Olympic lift that have been the best players in the team? Yes, I have. I just don't think there is enough reason for me to die on any of those hills. And it actually probably makes coaching harder because you need to be able to be across so many more things.
Mm.
It's like, yeah, let's start with block pulls. Let's start with shrug work. Let's start with front squatting. How you if someone's just like, oh, I cannot get a front rack position, okay, how much time do we need to dedicate to get you into front rack, and is it worth it? If
Hmm.
it is, let's do it. If it's simply like your wrists are tight as hell, like it's a very basic addition, then we can start laying it in. But some of the people that argue the nuanced value of a single exercise day in, day out just blows my mind. And to be honest, it kind of just, it turns me off a lot of social media stuff because I can't be bothered. It just wastes too much energy.
Hmm.
With just such
Oh,
nuanced discussion. You're like, at the end of the day, you can discuss this, and then you go into the gym and tell an athlete, and they don't do it. And then, well, what? Okay, well, what's next? Or they do it, and then they go home and have KFC. You're like, what? Like, what's better buying for? What's the better win for you? So, I think strength conditioning coaches as a whole, like, look, don't get me wrong. We all have our bias. I love things, and to be a great coach, I probably need to accept that you do need to have a little bit of this nuanced love and say, this is what we're about. We love doing this, and this is why we got into it, because we love these things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think we've got to always look at ourselves in the mirror and say, well, what I love so much, does that really affect the athlete? You know what I mean? Like,
mhm.
it's for me, I can't go to bed unless I have cleaned our kitchen bench, it's spotless. Does that really affect my day the next day or anyone else? Probably not. But for me, that's what I like doing. It's the same in the gym. Like, if I have an attachment to something, I like something being named a particular way or done a particular way. Of course, I'm going to try and coach it that way. But you've also got to understand some athletes are just not going to go down that path with you, and you've got to take a different path.
I agree. Yeah, yeah. Again, I'm a big Olympic weightlifting guy, but again, I'm not going to teach my older athletes to clean when they've never cleaned a
Yeah.
day in their life. Like it's like you mentioned before, it's very athlete dependent, very individualized to the
Yeah.
athlete.
Well,
Now, have I got time?
to a little bit of an extent, it's kind of like, especially in the private sector, and I used to be like this, that
Hmm.
private coaches will start up a facility and they want Watson dumbbells, they want a Leco, I mean, they cost an absolute fortune. And do you know who doesn't know even how to spell a Leco? Athletes.
Yep.
Most athletes that I've worked with are like, oh, sick. That's a black bar. That looks cool. Sick. Could be the cheapest or the most expensive. Now, I'm not saying, again, we still want quality products and good stuff and everything, but these little things, us as coaches care more about. If I'm looking at a facility, I'm
Mhm.
going far out. Full of Leco, everything's calibrated, Kaiser equipment to the roof, unbelievable. What athletes look at and go, oh, there's lots of bars. Like, also, like, they don't care. As long
Mhm.
like you can make something look amazing still. Like, they obviously know what a shoebox looks like versus a high end facility. But ultimately, in a private setting where revenue versus expenses are God, like, you don't really want to be outlaying so much. You don't need the fanciest things in the world to have an amazing facility. And the people that care the most are the coaches, not the
Mhm.
athletes. And the people that pay you are the athletes, not the coaches.
Yep. This is something else that you said that I resonate with is doing your homework so you can go into the weight room and connect with your athletes. And that's something that I personally learned from Conscious Coaching, the book, was I identify who you have. And like I learned this from Brandon Chu as well, is like have questions of the days for your athletes. Like at some point there will be no more questions. You know everything you need to know about them. But for the first couple months that you work with them, have a question for them. Like I love like what's your favorite ice cream? Well, big again, it's pulling that thread. They get to know my favorite ice cream. I get to know theirs. One of the most interesting ones is you're stranded on the island. What three things you bring? Now, athletes are some of the wildest people I have ever spoken to. One of them said an ice cream machine.
Mm,
Another one said a helicopter. And I was like, you're not stranded on this island. I
logical.
was like, but it's like, it opens that door for communication and them to be like, okay, I can trust him with more than just my
Mm,
performance.
yeah.
I can be myself. And I love this open door policy because it lets my athletes come to me if anything has happened. Like if they've had a shit day or if they've had an argument with their mums and dads, girlfriend, broken up, whatever, it lets them come to me and be like, "Hey, I'm not having a great day today."
Yeah.
Cool. We were supposed to do 80% our RMs. We're doing 80% of your RPE. Tell me how you feel. Find the 80% of that. I'm happy. I get the 80% regardless. Might not be the strength 80% that I want, but I'm still getting that effort from you.
Hmm.
And it just lets them know that I'm there for more than just the athlete.
Yeah, 100%. And mate, when I was, I had a manager at the Giants, David Joyce. A lot of people may know who he is anyway. He's fairly well known around the industry. He challenged me early on in my career with a great little technique to get to know athletes better is to find out a childhood story about them. And the
Mm,
trick with it is you can't just go up to an athlete and say, oh, you can tell me a childhood story. You kind of need to engage to build rapport and work your way down to that sort of depth. And it sounds corny, and it's not necessarily something that you just go and ask, because it's like when you're scripted, it sounds worse than if you're just
mhm,
natural. But when you have that front of mind, it's amazing the different questions that you decide to ask an athlete when you know that a task of yours for that week is to find out, a childhood story. And it's not the premise of finding a childhood story out; it's the premise of asking better questions of the athlete. And Brett, with his conscious coaching, he's obviously the guru around with this type of work and communication and connection, and he's great with it. And he does talk a lot about it. Just asking better questions. And you don't need to sound corny and stiff and
mhm,
just have a fucking list of questions that you're just piling off every time. But it does keep it front of mind. And I work a lot with my coaches around this. We have a framework for coaching on the gym floor called our EPIC framework, or EPIC, which is energy, presence, impact, and connection. And those four key things are what we go through. And under those four key things, we have two key questions about what we want to see from a coach. Now, it seems rigid, structured on paper, but all it's meant to do is have that metaphorical checklist in the head so it keeps it front of mind. Because when it's front of mind, you change the way you present yourself and the way you engage with athletes, knowing the outcomes that you want to get. Doesn't mean that you're just a robot and you're going through this ticker box. You just have it front of mind so you make better decisions and you ask better questions and you approach the environment in a better way to create what we want to create. And I think that's to your point. You don't need to have a list of questions per se,
mhm.
but if you've got an idea of what you want to find out, when you go into an environment, you've prepared for a coaching session, a field session, a speed session. If you've got a list of things you want to get out of it, it's amazing the difference that you approach with it, rather than just going in and going, right, I've got my lesson plan or my session plan of the outcomes of what I want to get from speed, agility, change of direction, speed, strength and power side. But you almost need a second column of, well, what the emotional connections and the communicative works I want to get out of this as well. And
Mhm.
again, it's amazing by just having that written or at least thought about. The approach you take to that session is going to be different.
100%. My favorite thing about the ice cream question is that I'm very honest with my athletes, and I say I will smash a whole tub of ice cream in one sitting, and they kind of look at me and like, "Am I allowed to admit to that too?" And I'm
Oh
like, "Hey, if you do that, I respect to you too." Like,
yeah.
it's amazing the type of answers you get, and it's 100%
Yeah.
like the questions aren't just questions to question them, but it's like they have to be for something. Like the
Well, sorry,
yes,
I
sir.
was just saying, I think that's building the trust with them as well. Like you become a bit more vulnerable to them; they're open to you. It's without naming names, there's a great story that I was told by a group of athletes that I started working with. That before I got there, they were headed up by someone that went through a really clean eating, like very strict, no carbs, everything organic, that type of stuff. And the players would get in at 7 a.m. They would eat organic, clean, everything till 2 p.m. They were so starved that they all went and got Macca's and KFC on the way home, and they almost had the opposite when they got, because they just went binge eating every afternoon because of how restricted it was during the day. Now they would never say that because there was never the rapport and the trust built. But if you start to build a bit more rapport and say, yeah, like I binge the hell out of stuff all the time. Like my Uber Eats, the order, I need to really adjust my Uber Eats account because I do it way too much. But when they start to understand that, they open up with you, and you want to be able to hold them to account without them fearing repercussion where they're not going to tell you the truth, because then there's no point. Like you might be able to tell other people, all my athletes are perfect and they eat everything well and they turn up on time and everything, but behind your back or behind closed doors, it's a whole different scenario. You'd prefer to have them at 80% and know it's a true 80% than perceive it's 100%, but they're actually down at 40. So it's a fine line of building that trust and getting their ability to open up to you, so you actually understand what's going on.
100%. What's the goal setting process that you go through with your athletes to help them achieve their goals throughout their career?
Look, to be honest, mate, there's nothing too complex with the way I go about it. For me, I understand in a team environment, there's a lot of different goals going to be set by a whole heap of different people. And I usually try and let them lead it predominantly. So I'll always have a sit down pre-season. So at the start of pre-season, before Christmas, then a couple of weeks before in-season starts, and then halfway through in-season, we'll have a bit of a chat. And really, it's a one-on-one, and it's a little bit more flexible than these rigid goal points. It's really about, okay, well, how did you feel? Obviously, is more of a review component. So how did you feel last year? What do you think was missing? What do you think you need to try and find in yourself this year? Get that down. Next thing is, how honest do you think you were last year with things? Do you feel like there was anything you could have done better? Things where you cut corners, things that you felt like at the time it was okay, but then when you reflect, you go, oof, I really should have made sure I was getting to bed at 9:30 instead of 11:30, because at the time it wasn't that big a deal. But now I look back and go, geez, that is just something that I probably need to improve on. So try and get a bit of a self-reflection. I'll then ask them about, well, what are the goals that you've got from the skills coach, from physio, whatever it might be. What are the key things they've talked to you about? Because I'm very mindful not having just my own agenda, where you pile on 6 different things, but they've also got 10 different things from all other people. And like I said, if you got 10 priorities, you got no priorities. You do need to consolidate it down to just the key priorities. So then I look at how we can start to marry some of those key aspects up. So for example, if one of them, I'm just making this up, but if one of the coach says, I need to get you need to be at field 15 minutes earlier because I just feel like you're not switched on when we start. So I'm like, okay, well, if the coach wants you there earlier, what can I do to layer that in? Okay, I need you to, your hip mobility is shocking. So we really need to work on that. So how about we layer in a hip mobility circuit that you do 15 minutes before you start the training session. So you're going to get there early anyway. So you're going to do this. So it kind of compacts these 2 goals together. A really simple example, obviously, but you can start to find things like that marry up. So I try and actually condense the number of foci they have rather than adding to it. Obviously, there's going to be times where you can't do that and you just got to give them another focus. It is what it is. But then I will give my opinion as to what I think they need. But I'll also and always try and link it back to feedback they've already given or things that we've seen on court, on field. So it's not about, let's get stronger. It's about, okay, you know how last year coach was always saying you couldn't break through tackles? One of the biggest things that we need to work on is getting that leg drive going. Because at the moment, where you sit within the group, your squat numbers, step up numbers, they're far lower. So how about we focus on that first, see how it bleeds into your ability to break tackles. If we get to a standard and it hasn't quite bled in enough, let's add another level to it. So typically that type of conversation, they'll be like, yeah, well, I can see the link there. So then you have that as their goal and their priority. So that's kind of how it is, a little bit more relaxed going back and forth like that. But I do try and frame and form for the pre-season, for the in-season, what are the foci going to be? Because obviously they're going to be 2 different aspects. You can't always chase what you want in season compared to what you do in pre-season. But we endeavour to do the best we can. But then I bring it back to what other goals and targets they have. And then we set up a little bit of an accountability. So, what does that actually look like? So if I'm saying I want their leg strength to improve to be able to break tackles more, well, this looks like you getting to 2 times body weight in your box squat rather than 1.6.
Yeah. How does then that turn into their actual physical programs that you're building or your coaches are building?
Yeah, so it really it influences pretty much everything that we do with it. We start to go, okay, well, in any team environment, I'll have my base program, that overarching program that I use for the squad. From that, I have a number of individualizations that I'll do for athletes. Key aspect is going to be typically the first one is going to be age, our younger ones versus our more experienced. Next one's going to be positional based. So, what do they need for their positions? Next one's going to be injury history and then likes and dislikes. And then within
Mm.
that, it's like, okay, what are the goals? Does the program that is currently in there satisfy that? Because what I see a lot of people do is say, right, I want to increase leg strength. Okay, great. They look at the program and they edit all these things to increase leg strength. But the program that was already there is still going to increase leg strength. You don't need to just keep adding and changing. And I'll often communicate with my athletes that the further away you are from what I would call our central based program, the worse off it is. We kind of want you to be aligned as much as possible because it means you have the least amount of issues. So, like,
Mhm.
the more away you are, the more, say, injuries you've had historically. Yes, we have some modifications for some positional work, but if I've got even more modification, it means you're probably behind the eight ball more as well. So I try and instill this real theme of we want to be aligned in a lot of big lifts, and the early part of the program, a lot of the group will be doing very similar things because they need the same outcomes. And then as the program progresses through the session, typically it'll become a little bit more individual based on what they need. Key aspects being injury history, position, but then also the goals and outcome. But in saying that, as an example, if a goal of someone is to get stronger in their legs, guess what? That's block one of every program. Like, there's no one that doesn't need to get kind of stronger. Yeah, some need to get it more than others, but typically the ones that are weaker are going to have a faster progression. So often they don't always need more volume or more exposure. Just follow the program and it's going to get you there. Yes, there's
Yeah.
going to be examples where we need to add more and we add more. But ultimately, I endeavor to keep people as aligned as possible because I really believe that me working with you on a box squat is far more valuable than you doing a step up and me doing a box squat because I want to give the illusion of this individualized program when in actual fact, I'm going to push you, you're going to push me. We're the same position in the same sport. Yeah, we've both got box squatting. That's not rocket science. Let's just go to town and get it done. That's far
100%.
more effective in my mind.
It's the whole principle of bucket filling. Like, what do my athletes need? Like, what is their special bucket? Like, what are they really good at? Is their strength,
Yep.
power, endurance, whatever it is? And then what can I fill in that you're lacking? And I think you put it brilliantly. It's like there will be differences in programs, but if you've got a whole team and everyone needs to do a hip hinge or a knee dominant movement, a push or a pull,
Mm,
unless there's something seriously wrong that they can't do it, you are going to make that same movement across the board.
of course. Yeah. Agreed.
Um, if you were to PR yourself, what's your PR song?
PR song would have to be Eric Pritis Every Day. Is by far my favourite song for getting myself
Uh,
up.
don't think I've heard that. I'll pop it on after.
Download it. She's a cracker.
What's your conditioning playlist look like?
Like Lincoln Park? No, conditioning
Ooh.
plans. No, no, no. To be honest, I'm a massive fan of like Disclosure and stuff like that. So if you want to
Mm.
know my playlist, if you go to Disclosure Radio on Spotify, every one of those songs is pretty much me. It's a that sort of half house,
Yeah,
half EDM type feel. Bit of good strong beat with a very soft lyric over the top, mate. That'll get me through most things.
nice. See, I love to ask coaches this because, like, again, old school coaches are more like heavy metal stuff.
Yeah.
Some of the newer coaches are getting into the rap and stuff. But like,
I'm, I'm pretty eclectic. I like them all, but yeah, if I had to pick one theme that I could just have on, and that's the key. Like, if I'm going to set a playlist that's going
Mhm.
to play the whole session, that'll be what it is for sure.
Nice. I'm a big I love Linkin Park as well, so I've bopped to that. PR songs are more heavy rap.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what gets me through. What's a piece of advice that you would give new strength coaches or coaches wanting to come into this industry?
Probably to keep it aligned with what we've been talking about, to sort of wrap it up, I reckon um, be a little less professional, be yourself. Don't obviously disclose everything. Keep a few cards to yourself. But I think the more you start to realize that as a young coach, yes, you need to absolutely go to town on the X's and O's and knowing how to be a good coach and know what works and what methods have been tried, but don't do that at the exclusion of still being able to communicate like a normal human being. Because I think that the smarter some people get, the harder it is
Mm.
for them to be coaches because they distance themselves too much. And to be honest, we probably start to see that in academia where coaches will start and they'll go down the PhD path and they very intelligent coaches, very good stuff, and to be honest, aid the industry amazingly and help other coaches, but do not connect with athletes very well.
Mm. I agree. So the thing is, like, I speak for a living, but like these interviews are done the way that I do them because it's more natural to me to speak to a coach about their
Mm,
experience as opposed to say like, oh, you use box squats, like what's the scientific reason for you to personally use your box squats there? I know this and I know the science behind it, but I want
mm,
to know how you connect with your athletes. What's
yeah,
some of the tips that we can actually use practically to get through this industry? And it's again, it's very simple, and like I've obviously done my education. I The science is the science, but I would rather get to know the practical side from different coaches and how that can help the athletes. So like, yeah, 100%. You can get a
well,
PhD just by speaking to people.
yeah, yeah. I agree, mate. Agreed.
No, if you want to let people know where they can find you and reach out to you.
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, mate, most of these just on Instagram. What is performance coach underscore Wilmot? Oh, there you go. Yeah, I got it right. I keep forgetting what I am. But yeah, so I need to get better with it. As I said, with life at the moment being busy and to be brutally honest, I am a little bit off social media generally. I just get sick and tired of people talking crap all the time. So it's not really my thing. But I do need to get back on purely because I do want to share more content and keep hopefully educating coaches. So yeah, jump on board there. That's the best way to find anything on me.
100%. Please never go on TikTok because your brain will explode. I
No, no, mate. Yeah, I've got enough athletes here that show me TikTok, so I don't need to see it myself on my phone.
I've so I like sometimes when I'm just like I just need to distract myself from everything
Yeah,
that's going on. I'll
yeah.
hop on TikTok and just get so angry that I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go back.
No, I don't mind the old just death scroll on Instagram Reels, but it has nothing to do with strength conditioning and everything to
Mm.
do with absolute piss takes and very funny videos. Which yeah, trust me, I do get caught up doing that, but that's usually when I'm killing time on the toilet or I'm bored as hell, which is very rare these days.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate you for coming on again. Like I mentioned, like you're a coach that I followed for a while, so this is awesome to be able to sit down and speak with you.
Awesome. No, it was great to chat, Manny. Appreciate the time, mate.
Peace.